A warm welcome to all. My name is Esther Schmidt. I'm the director of the Center for Historic Houses of India. I'm thrilled to have this event, and it's a wonderful opportunity to build bridges between different estates, bridges between different people, bridges even between different continents. This is day 4 of our new lecture series, Great Minds in Heritage and Historic Houses. And I've said this earlier in the previous sessions. So why is there no unifying theme? Well, actually the theme is you. The theme is the houses, and especially because of recent political events and especially because of the pandemic, I think this is a fantastic time to reflect on what we really want to do, what we really need to revise, what we need to change, what we can improve, and also to have a new sense of communities, local and both further away. So thank you very much for joining. We'll start with Vaux-Le Vicomte in France, and Alexandre de Vogüé, who is one of the owners, but he's also the vice president of Demeure Historique, which is the organization for the French private chateau. And I'm really, really pleased to have you. And later, once you're finished, we'll ask questions at the end. Please do use the chat box. I'd like to have this event as a very interactive event, to also use the current situation of the pandemic when we are unable to travel and meet our friends and colleagues, to use this as a forum for exchange. Welcome.
I think you might be muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mimi, for your invitation. It's always quite exciting to e-meet, people who are working in the same area. And yeah, despite the pandemic, I'd like to offer you a very brief view of what we are doing at Vaux-Le Vicomte, what we've been doing in the very recent years in terms of innovation, and what we are doing right now in terms of restoration and cultural mediation. So I'll go very quickly into the history of the place. We cannot talk about Vaux-Le Vicomte without knowing who was at the very beginning of this amazing story. Nicolas Fouquet, who was the superintendent of the finance under the young King Louis XIV. He decided to fulfill a fantasy and an ambition to have the most beautiful house ever in France. In order to fulfill his love for the arts, he was definitely a very true lover of the art, a collector, but also his ambition. He was very ambitious. He wanted to be as close as possible to the king, and by showing his wealth, his taste, his influence, he would then perhaps reach his goal. And that's what he did by imagining and then constructing the Chateau de Vaux-Le Vicomte. He surrounded himself by the 3 best artists of his time. Louis Levaux, the architect, there's no known portrait of him. André Lenôtre, the famous landscape designer, and Charles Lebrun, the painter, decorator. And he gave them what any artist would dream of. First, a blank canvas of 1,200 acres. Second, a lot of money, because he was already rich. You know, he got married strategically twice. And when I say strategically, it means like there was a big, comfortable endowment. And he also pursued the business of his father, who had organized some link with boats between Brittany and the Antilles, the island. So he was a wealthy man, but he then climbed the ladder of his profession very quickly. He's a very intelligent, witty, charming person. And finally had these 3 artists, and in less than 10 years built Vaux-Le Vicomte. The day of the famous party of inauguration, 17th of August, 1661, it was already 3 months that the destiny of the poor Nicolas Fouquet was sealed. You have to know that a man called Jean-Baptiste Colbert was very jealous of the successful and flamboyant Fouquet. Both of them wanted to become the next prime minister. Definitely, Fouquet was in advance, and Colbert just convinced the king that Fouquet was the bad guy. He was the bad guy because supposedly he was trying to raise an army to overthrow the king. He was stealing in the cash of the kingdom. And Louis XIV ended up by being convinced by Colbert. And 3 months before this famous party, they put up a plot, decided the date of the arrest of Nicolas Fouquet, that will happen barely 3 weeks after this party, decided to nominate the judges of the trial, etc. So everything was organized to get rid of a too ambitious and dangerous Nicolas Fouquet. What remains today is Vaux-Le Vicomte, this masterpiece of the 17th century, where the king was so amazed, as well as all the court, by such a beautiful estate, but more than beautiful, innovative, very bold and innovative for the time being. And we have at Vaux-Le Vicomte for the first time what we will call a French formal garden, which is not just a garden, but an architecture and a garden and a park and a decoration which has been thought and built together in relation with everything else. So we have a central axis going north, where I am. Here we go. Going north to south, along which everything is organized. So this is just in a nutshell, the story of Nicolas Fouquet. Now, Nicolas Fouquet is going to be sent into prison, where he's going to die after 19 years. So he barely enjoyed his estate. He had this fabulous party. He had the best artists around him, such as Molière, who wrote a play for him, La Fontaine, Pélisson, Madame de Sévigné. And then the king just understood exactly what he had to do, basically to do exactly what Fouquet have done. So the king took the same artist and built Versailles in order to use, as Fouquet did, the arts to show how powerful the king was. And that was then communicating to all of Europe. So Versailles was definitely a tool of propaganda for Louis XIV and for the absolutism of Louis XIV. So what we try to do now is, of course, to transmit, to share this story, the stories of Vaux-Le Vicomte, the heritage, to the maximum number of people, but more than numbers, in a way where we would respect the place and respect the spirit of the place. So for example, a lot of companies, small companies, startups came to us to try to sell us some apps on one's phone, tablet, whatever. And after a few weeks or a few months, we thought with my brothers, well, this is definitely not what we want to have, This is a house. This is an inhabited house for 3 centuries and a half, and we don't want to see people just looking at their screen. And we really think, despite what they were all trying to convince us with, that with a screen, with a tool in your hands, it's an obstacle between the collection, the decor, and the visitor. So what we aim for was the sound, and we built up this this project, that we call the Immersive Sound Journey. We invited some comedians, and some of them from the Comédie Française, to record the story of Nicolas Fouquet by playing the role of the main characters. So basically, we had some comedians that were playing La Fontaine, Colbert, the other ones, the king, Fouquet, his wife, etc., in the actual room of the chateau. So when the visitor is entering a room with his headphones, it triggered automatically the story that has been recorded in the room. And then, room after another, the guest is completely immersed into the story of Nicolas Fouquet with a three-dimensional or binaural sound. So it's an absolutely extraordinary sound where you can hear someone whispering on your right, and you will turn your head, being convinced that someone is whispering at your ear on your right, or the crackling of the fire, or a window that is, being opened discreetly. Every sound you listen. So it's really like a film that the visitor has to imagine thanks to the sound. So he's got his free hands. He's completely free, and he just go with the flow of the visit, and I mean with the flow of the story that is told to him through the headphones. So we're very happy with that. This is free to every visitor. There's two versions, one for kids and one for adults. I think the one for kids is better than the one for the adults because it's the second one we did and we learned from the first one. But we're very, very happy. And I think, this is the experience. We talk a lot about experience in our world, and immersive experience is definitely what we wanted to have and wanted to offer to our visitors. Completely another type of project, but extremely important, and it is basically the key of what we do at Vaux-Le-Vicomte is the restoration, what we call in our slang, les restaurations monuments historiques, which is the restoration that are key to the monument, to the collection, to the garden, and it can be a roof, it can be a painting, it can be a hydraulic system. It is part of the history of Vaux-Le-Vicomte, and for that we have a little bit of subsidies. Basically, we have 6% of our budget, which are coming from public subsidies. Then we have 15 to 80% of restoration project that is funded by private funding, which is basically donors, private donors that are coming mainly from France, and they are individuals as well as corporations. And the other part are coming from the United States. So here we've been dreaming about this project of restoring the cupola and the Grand Salon in itself, which is the nevralgic part of the and room of the chateau. We just began a few weeks ago. There's 60 tons of scaffolding, and on the lower left picture, you can see my brother here with the architecte en chef des monuments historiques just under the cupola. So they are at 18 meters, so 60 feet high from the ground, thanks to the scaffolding, and they are observing the sky that has been painted in the 19th century. It is, of course, extraordinary to be able to have this privilege to be able to touch almost all those sculptures that have been sculpted 350 years ago, and to decide with the architects, with a scientific committee, with the artisan, what we are going to do. There are we just found out some layers of painting that could have been done during the time of Fouquet, and that perhaps were tests of different colors, because it looks like the Grand Salon was not finished because Nicolas Fouquet got arrested 3 weeks after the party. So anyway, it's very exciting, and this has been done mainly like 80% thanks to our private donors, whom I'm so grateful and ever grateful. The second stage of this project is going to be, this is the drawing, well, the engraving actually, of what was the fresco to be painted on the cupola if Nicolas Fouquet were not arrested. So Lebrun, the painter decorator, had this project. He drew a few preparatory drawings that are at the Louvre Museum today, but no time to paint that fresco into the cupola. So we have the engraving. We have the Louvre has the drawings. What we are going to do is we're going to use those illustrations to project them onto the cupola with monumental projectors, like a mapping video, if you know what I mean. But we're going to do that onto the cupola. And this is a montage of the engraving onto the cupola. This is going to be done in 2022, as we're going to use the same process in 2021 to tell the story of the friendship between Fouquet and his great friend Jean de La Fontaine, that we are celebrating the 400th anniversary this year. That is another story which began which began as a drama. As you can see on the right, the picture on the right, there's this boxwood that has been attacked it began in 2014, but it went dramatically fierce and catastrophic in 2018 with the moth. So the box blight first, which are fungus, and then a moth that transform into caterpillar that eat the leaves and then even the wood of the boxwood. So these are the different stages of this caterpillar who can destroy boxwood in one night. So in one night, you can have from one day to another, you can lose 100% of the leaves of a boxwood plant. And that can be done on hectares. This is quite well known all over Europe, from China to Europe. It came from China. It migrates all the way to the west coast of the Atlantic of Europe. And I know that in the United States, there are some places that has been attacked by this pyrale, in French, we call them. What we had to do, and the scientific committee validated that sad option, was to remove those boxwood, this embroidery boxwood parterre that are right in front of the house, and that have been planted by my great-grandfather in 1906. It was 1 century that they were there. We are living in front of them every day, and it was kind of sad to see those machine to get rid of those boxwood. But at the end of the day, it's a garden, and a garden is a living monument, you know, and it evaluates, it dies, there's a rebirth, etc. So we were just trying to be enthusiastic as possible for the next step. And we scratched our head and thought, what are we going to present to the visitors in, that was in January 2019, and we were opening in March. But, you know, the garden, we would allow ourselves to be still working on a new project until June, but in June it must have been inaugurated. So we thought about putting up a call for proposal among artists, designers, landscape designers, in order for them to design an ephemeral project, because we wanted to have a project for 5 years and not more, in order to give the scientific community to find some solution for the boxwood. So to give them time, and during that time we would have a project. So this is the project that won the competition. It is by a French artist called Patrick Courtyard. And what we liked about it, and what the visitors liked about it, is that what we hear constantly is which I think is the best compliment we can have, is it looks like it's been there forever. And that's exactly what we wanted. It's the brief was very short. You know, we were saying, basically, you are in the garden of Le Nôtre. You are surrounded by some features. Please do create a project that integrates perfectly with the rest of the garden. It is in some ways the contrary of what sometimes the contemporary art is showing, is in your face, or it can be, how do you call it in French? It can be controversial. We didn't want anything like that. We just wanted the contrary. Everyone, I mean, it had to be almost natural. So these ephemeral ribbons are going to be there another 3 years, and we are still very happy with that. Last project, the fountains. We have fountains all over the estate, and those fountains are fed by a hydraulic system who have been invented by André Le Nôtre in the 17th century. It has been, of course, restored in the 19th century, but it's still working on the same. So I have some close-up of this scheme, but basically you have the chateau on the right, you have the Farnese Hercules on the left, and you have all the hydraulic system with 2 reservoirs on the 2 highest points of the estate. Today, when you open those reservoirs, it feeds the fountain for 6 hours. At the end of the 6 hours, there's no more water. And we have to wait between 5 and 10 days, depending on the weather, the rain, the spring. There are some wide spring everywhere, to feed again and to fill up the reservoir. So what we want is to open the fountains every day. For the moment, we have them open twice a month because of the limitation in water supply. We want to have them every day. So we want to build electricity all the way to the left side. So basically I have here this same scheme, but in 2 parts, but we want to bring the water on the top scheme next to the reservoir, thanks to the Grand Canal, next to the Grand Canal. And the Grand Canal, which is Canal de la Poêle, here we would put a pump, electric pump, to feed water into the reservoir on the left. Thanks to that, we would have water in order to have the fountains every day when we are open, and even during our candlelit evening. That would make such a difference in the garden. That would just add so much life to the garden. And it's the audacity of the Grand Siècle of the 17th century, of those artists that were bold enough to invent such a masterpiece, that we want to continue and to be as close as possible as if it was in the 17th century. This is almost more than 16 minutes. So this is basically the last, the last project. Well, this is a big project that we just began. We're going to work on it and raise money for it. But this is the very sheer excitement that we have and privilege to have to decide for the future of Vaux-Le Vicomte. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Alexandre. I really can't hear enough of this fantastic history associated so closely with all the people we know so well about 17th century history, so closely related to the Chateau de Versailles. And to live with this it's such a privilege, and it's a challenge at the same time. It's amazing what you do, and also how you integrate contemporary art without offering offense to the building, without stealing the show, and at the same time also, visitor interpretation. But also, as you say, yes, it is so annoying to see people constantly glued to the screen. You kind of identified this and you found another solution. So it's really really inspirational. Thanks so much. Thank you. We are now moving to William Cartwright, and I'm also really, really thrilled to have you, William. We've been talking and communicating for a long time, also with Alexandre, and finally all of you are here together. And I really hope that you will actually continue the discussion, because everyone here on the panel, they're really wonderful people, and I think you will really have many great conversations. So William is the owner of a beautiful house we can see here, Iford Manor. But he's also the vice president of the European Historic Houses Association. And we are very privileged to hear from him, because you've been, the institution has existed for a long time, and we are just starting out. And he's going to talk about the next generation, followed then by Akshita from India, who is a representative of this kind of next generation. So thank you very much, William.
Well, thank you. I hope you can see my screen. I think I'd just like to start out really by reminding ourselves of the importance of cultural heritage, because for a start, we can forget that heritage is the only thing which we have, which once it's lost can never be regained. I mean, you can't buy age, You can't buy a backstory. You can't just invent the history of a civilization. So make no mistake, our heritage is nothing short of that, an integral means of telling the story of how we came to be where we are today. Now, it's not the whole story, of course, but it is the bit that we have that remains tangibly with us. And heritage comes in many forms, of course, from the languages we speak to the art we create, and today we're speaking about the built heritage. Over 40% of historic buildings in Europe are owned by private individuals. So if you strip out the churches and municipal structures from that total, it suggests that private owners of heritage amount for an absolutely enormous number of buildings. And that obviously increases the importance of the role that they play in maintaining those structures. And we, as those private individuals, are blessed with the privilege of being the guardians of heritage today. We are the guardians of a long, unbroken chain of history. And it rather puts the focus on the important role that we do and how we create sustainable solutions for the future. It also, in and of itself, raises up the importance of passing on that heritage and how we do it. So today I want to explore what makes for a successful private historic house and some of the learnings that I've made from my work in historic houses across Europe with regard to succession. Too many houses haven't made it through the last centuries. Sometimes they're destroyed through conflict, but in modern times they're more often than not a victim of a lack of support or neglect, or the construction of a bypass, heavy taxation, whatever it might be. So the very survival of our houses is, to an extent, an initial benchmark of success. We learnt in the UK to our cost in the 1960s how fragile our heritage is. Anyone who, I wasn't around at the time, but anyone who remembers Sir Roy Strong's exhibition, The Destruction of the Country House, will attest the loss of sometimes several great houses a week being hauled down because of the costs. Why? Well, at face value, a decimated rural economy, a highly disadvantageous political environment, high taxation, all that sort of stuff. But dig under the surface and you find that the root cause is a little simpler. Imagine for a moment you are a historic house, or any piece of heritage for that matter, but houses today. You have no power to look after yourself. You are essentially, you have to find somebody to look after you. So being irrelevant is the precursor to your destruction. Once the population, and particularly the power in Parliament, see no protection, then you're done for. You are lost. You are merely old clutter. And that's the heart of the problem with heritage. It only survives when it's relevant to somebody, to enough people, to a community, to a country, to a town, such that people actively care about it. And our goal, when acting on behalf of our own heritage, must therefore be to ensure that our heritage bears relevance over time. This could mean a lot of different things. It could be relevance to a local community, or it could be relevance to a resource for academic research, or it could be as a commercial space or a way of interpreting the past to understand the future. And doesn't Alexandre de Vogüé's audio guide do exactly that? All of these are different ways to connect. Relevance can be so many things, and each house has its own challenges and solutions. But it is exactly that variety which makes these houses and histories so fascinating. So we've mentioned this long chain of history already, but this doesn't only apply looking back. If survival is our goal, then we must be just one lamina in the future chain of history. And the ability to form a long view and to change slowly, consistently, and respectfully is at the heart of a sustainable approach to heritage. We are, so to speak, driving our course in an antique car. While the flash kids are revving it up in a Maserati, ours takes a more careful handling. With all cars, of course, and particularly old cars, you only get to crash them once. So you have to drive very carefully indeed. So in considering our own properties, we need to think on a long cycle. Our forebears planted trees, for example, which they never saw to maturity, but we get to enjoy. And so it is with our own approach to these buildings. I think it's what sets us apart, actually, from modern business practices, which are increasingly short-termist. So combining long-term thinking with a respect for history and a key eye to remaining relevant is no mean feat. But certainly historic properties and private ownership have two key advantages: agility and cross-generational knowledge of the world around us. Our ability to change with the times as private owners, as king of our castle, literally in some cases, means that we can be innovative, collaborate more easily, and flex with the changes in the political, social, and economic wind. This advantage has always existed, but I think it's only in recent decades, with the rapid advancements of the pace of life, the ability to travel, to change the course of one's existence on your mobile phone in a matter of hours, that it has moved from being useful to being essential. My experience of speaking with historic property owners in Europe tells me that as we grow older, we become less adapted to change. We don't like change as much. I think we all appreciate that. This is not a criticism, it's just a function of growing into one's own life experience. By contrast, the younger generation is usually working away out in the community, getting a job, less shackled by the constraints of living in, or perhaps with, you might say, a historic house. And today there's a greater importance than ever of working across generations. The experience of the older generation's consultants and as a safety net, combined with the enthusiasm, the vigour and the innovation of the younger generation to create new ideas and uses, in short, to keep the property relevant for the next 50 years, is something of a killer combination when it works. And the rise of social media as one of the, if not the, principal means for advertising and communicating with communities today obviously gives the younger generation something of a unique knowledge. I'm already at 38 starting to lose track of my 2-year-old child's knowledge of technology, which is very concerning. Succession planning has two axiomatic elements. Firstly, succession, the need for a next generation. This might be linear through children or grandchildren, or it might be someone else, family or otherwise. But it needs thinking about, and it can no longer be assumed. Whereas 100 years ago, the eldest son was kind of set for life. You know, you inherited a huge house with a staff and enormous acreage, and it was all sorted. Today, it's less of a best-case scenario and more of a management challenge, which interrupts a perhaps international career, moving a young family from its established home, disrupting a spouse's career too, etc., etc. It's a wonderful problem to have, don't get me wrong, but a plan is really definitely needed to ensure the heritage doesn't only bring responsibilities, but also a lifestyle to be enjoyed too. And the second bit of succession planning is the planning. In my experience, the majority of families find this bit rather less enjoyable than the creation of the children in the first place, if you see what I mean. Here's my family. My mother purchased Iford in 1965, downsizing from a much larger house in the middle of England following a family tragedy. Having inherited at 15 a house which the family built 350 years prior, that's Aynho Park in Oxfordshire, she felt a very strong sense of responsibility to her history, and so she wanted to find a new home for the family. And our home at Iford is that new home. She ran and built the estate for 50 years with the support of my father until my wife Marianne and I took over in 2016. Now, with regard to the planning bit, for us, succession planning, in my case, I was blessed with a mother who actually had no problem at all talking openly about money and taxes and mortality, all the sorts of subjects that we as people living in old houses traditionally can't talk about. But as a consequence, we always had a very open approach to discussing how to manage the estate in the future. And it was really an amazing gift when they handed over to us in our mid-30s, because we still had the energy to make changes. And we had we had that vigor to do things. And as my ma said, she might hate it watching me do things differently, but do it anyway, because everything has to change. And I think this was the major benefit of handing over the reins during tenure, rather than the traditional handover at a funeral. It doesn't mean it's easy for either party. We certainly don't always agree, and the conversations weren't always straightforward, but they were essential. And my mother once said to me that if we don't do it now, when will we do it? And I think that was quite relevant. She was 77 when she handed over, and she's still fit and active and actively involved in the business, but ultimately doesn't have the responsibility of signing the check. From our part, we had to make some changes at a respectful but pretty rapid pace to get things up and running. We've redrawn the boundaries between home and business, public and private. We're just at the end of a 2-year construction of our new cafe, which is coming along, opening in May. And we've done all of that to support really the garden visitor business. This is what they're coming to see. Now, every house and estate is different, so innovations to ensure relevance are always going to be different too. And bear in mind, one person's innovation might be blindingly obvious to somebody else, so I speak quite broadly here. Ways of being innovative and relevant, let's see, what have we got? So from the local, such as our annual Butterfly Day for primary school children to get them engaged in nature, our small socially distanced concerts last year, just at the end of government lockdown, we were able to do some concerts with everyone sitting 2 meters apart and all very safe. And, you know, it was so appreciated by the local community just to have something to do. A lot of goodwill built up on that level. At the national level, you see many historic houses using their parkland for festivals, ranging from the more well-known ones like the Leeds Festival in the UK at Bramwell Park, or a Festival of Lights at Longleat. Beautiful way of using a property in the winter when it can be difficult to open, especially in the UK when it rains all the time. There's even a marmalade festival at Dalmain in Scotland, which has proved extremely popular. And these are examples of profitability for historic houses through, you know, small, innovative opportunities. Provenance is an important word at the moment, where things come from. People are really searching for meaning in things that they do and eat. Many estates, ourselves included, offer a restaurant and cafe dining with food produced on the estate and from local producers. Here you can see Carudry House in Ireland's outdoor market, coffee shop, farm shop, all serving through the pandemic. They've been able to make this COVID safe so that their local community in the town have really connected with them as a central hub. And that again is that sense of relevance to a community. What else? More innovative uses such as using a cookery or language school at the Chateau de la Mesure in France. 2 generations again there working together. Thibault, our friend, and his mother, who is a teacher. Of course, Alex's audio guides, what they do at Vaux-Le Vicomte, and there are so many other examples. I think it's worth mentioning that solutions to historic properties don't have to be bringing people to the property. Very often you can take the property to them. Our example at Iford is our Iford cider product, which is made on the estate, bottled and sold in pubs and restaurants around 100 miles, you know, that sort of distance. It's an easy way for us to connect. There are online ways. Alexandre mentioned apps. There are plenty of those around which are trying to support historic properties, and D'Artagnan is a French company doing crowdsourcing for historic restorations. Another way of using modern methods to achieve historic aims. So all these activities have something in common, and this is the heart of what I want to say, really. They place the heritage at the heart of the community, and they make it relevant today and secure it in some manner for the future. This year, with the pandemic, more than ever before, I think we've seen people appreciating their heritage. You know, frustrated and under house arrest, effectively, with the pandemic going on and lockdowns in many countries, people have, at the first opportunity, have rushed out to look for some countryside or a parkland. And where do they find it? Around the historic castle in the city. And if you go look in the Czech Republic at Castle Blatna, a wonderful house owned and managed by Stefanos Germanis and his mother, again, a cross-generational management team. They this year reported an absolute upsurge in numbers of people from the town rediscovering their heritage. They opened a coffee shop, and apparently it was quite profitable. So opportunity abounds. You know, especially poignant, I think, in the Czech Republic, where you've got a very turbulent history with historic property through pre-communist and then communist and then the restitution period. So those agile families living in their homes, passionate about their heritage, many of them having been passionate about it for 300 or 400 years, are imbuing that passion into their younger generation, finding clever ways to secure their future. And they are the lifeblood of historic houses. So harnessing the passion of that next generation is key. And the experience of the parents as well is that killer combination, as I say. It's an extremely powerful means of ensuring stability, relevance, and innovation. To help to nurture the enthusiasm and support of development in the younger generation to take on their properties, European historic houses have put together a strong focus on next-gen groups in what we do. So over the last 7 years, with support from the office in Brussels, I've helped the formation of national next-generation groups across the continent, where young members of historic house-owning families can now share best practice, meet each other, exchange ideas and challenges. Offering such a learning environment has, I think, been shown really in the UK particularly to be a very useful means of supporting innovative thinking. The UK group's been running for 45 years now, and it's just as useful as it was when it started. So every year at European level, we host a conference to bring together the most active of these young guardians of heritage. In 2016, we visited Vaux-Le Vicomte. It was a wonderful visit. This year, we should have been in Ireland. These are photographs from Italy and Spain. We go and visit the places that are full of people being passionate about their management. And this year, we're launching a Young Entrepreneur Award for young heritage owners. So to sum up, we can all do our bit. And I have to comment that, the work that the Indian Centre for Historic Houses is doing is really fantastic in bringing together people around this central subject. And so perhaps in India too, it's time for a next-gen group, who knows, to support the next generation of historic properties, implementing their passion and protecting their family heritage for all of us to enjoy now into the future. Thank you.
Fantastic, William. Actually, I think we should introduce an applause, for our lectures. We're all waiting. It's really fantastic and so insightful. I didn't know about the Marmalade Festival. It really made me laugh. Brilliant. Thank you. I'd like to hand it over to the next generation owner, Archita Banjdio from Bulgaria Palace in Odisha, India.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to be sharing my screen. Please do let me know once you can see it.
Yes.
Great.
Great. Thank you.
To begin with, I feel so honored to be here with a very, very experienced panel who have so much sort of knowledge about the topic they're speaking on. And it was lovely to hear different ideas and innovative ways that there are people all around the world. There seems to be a special kinship between custodians, the word I like to use, of historic properties, given their, I feel there's a sense of duty and passion and responsibility, but also a sense of being able to preserve the past and really be able to make it contemporary and useful for the future. I realize my video is off. I'm gonna try putting it on. Okay. So to begin with, I kind of wanted to set the context of where really I'm telling you the story from. The area that I'm speaking about is Mayurbhanj in North Orissa, and it was one of the 575 princely states of the British India. The reason why this area is important historically is it has always sort of been a very rich naval history. It has had princely states. Sorry, I think my videos. Yes, it's always been, it was the largest of one of the Eastern princely states, but more than that, it had this very long line of succession from both indigenous tribal communities who then married into and had alliances with royal families from Rajasthan, the north. When we speak about historical properties in India, it's kind of hard to talk about them without these very magnanimous forts and palaces that have dominated sort of the cultural stereotype of Indian historical properties. However, Mayurbhanj and the eastern states were different. They were one of the first few areas which actually worked and sort of had alliances with the European colonial powers coming in. And for that reason, they started building houses for foreign dignitaries very, very early on. So Bulgaria, the place that I'm going to speak about, had these very iconic women and men rulers, and they sort of were already covered. They were sort of already working and being able to collaborate with different foreign entities. It wasn't just the British, it was the French, it was the Portuguese, it was families from Southeast Asia. And this is the Bulgaria Palace. It's my home. It's been in my family since the early 1800s. It was a guest house that was used by the erstwhile royal family to invite foreign dignitaries to come and invest in the state. So there was always an idea of being hospitable, of being able to invite and welcome new guests, new relatives, new friends, and really build on the idea of India. I know I'm speaking to a global audience, so I'm going to try making references to people that personalities that people may know, but one of the famous personalities we had come and stay with us was Mark Shand, the Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla Parker Bowles' brother, when he was traveling on his elephant Tara across India. Apart from that, there's a very big conglomerate in India called the Tatas. And the founder of the Tata conglomerate actually came and visited Mayurbhanj on invitation of the ruler, and impressed by its iron ore and natural resources, which was sort of the point of the invitation, he started the first iron ore and steel mine of India in 1904 in Mayurbhanj. And as we know, the rest is history. Tata is one of the biggest conglomerates out of India, and it kind of started from this very humble origins in this house. These are just two pictures of the rooms we had. We actually had these massive rooms with very high ceilings, antique furniture. There were trophies in every room. There was a bar cabinets in every room. And a lot of these rooms were bigger. We actually had to seal doors and make 2 or 3 rooms, make 3 rooms out of 1 room, because we were still trying to figure out who really would inhabit this space. It was definitely not being used anymore for the purpose it was intended. I think you can see me now. Moving on, this was another one of our rooms. This is our hallway. And this is very interesting. It's kind of hard to describe without being in the house. But like I said, the family moved in very, very recently. And we sort of did feel, the family wasn't living in Mayurbhanj anymore. They'd moved to a capital nearby, 4 hours away. But we felt a need to sort of restore it and do it in a way that had social equity and sustainability right in the middle of it. There was a sense of this being one of our last bastions of the family history, and we wanted to make it more of a platform than a property. So immediately before we started thinking of it as a hotel, the idea was, how will this space be used? Because the community finds no purpose in the house, it kind of disintegrates. Someone very beautifully put it, right? These are places that sort of, the gardens are sort of living heritage pieces. And I think in a similar way, these properties are as well. They're of cultural significance to the community. They tell the story of of an empire, of people, of the community's ancestors. And so rooms such as this on the right, which were projector and theater rooms, were actually projector and theater rooms in the past as well. Bulgaria was mostly used by British governors or lords and ladies or, investors. And so the idea was, it was not as palatial as more of a leisure house. This became really important to us during the Bengal Renaissance era, which was the early 1900s in India. And, Calcutta is the British capital. This house is about 4 hours away. And there's a fantastic love story, and I will post it on the chat comment section. But you really saw a lot of artists, philosophers, cultural icons, movers and shakers inhabiting these rooms. The room you see on the left is actually one of the hallways in our upstairs wings. And if you look at the small doors right at the end, these were actually smaller rooms for valets and ladies in waiting for the men and women who came to the house. So we actually had rooms we have 9 rooms, but 22 in total, including our libraries and other leisure rooms, billiards rooms, snooker rooms, theater rooms, etc. These smaller rooms were also reused because we realized we wanted to tell the story of the house almost as if it was a living museum, just rooms being updated, but an element of the history being presented as well. If you can see on the left, this is the same room that's being reflected on the right. And there's a certain similarity there, but at the same time, we tried to We had a manifesto of sustainability pointers we wanted to stick to. Everything had to be upcycled. Everything had to be, we used local help, sourced everything locally. We tried to make sure, because we are a natural disaster prone area, if there was extra wood, if there was extra materials that could be more environmentally friendly, environmentally conscious, that's what was used. We, except for the technical wiring and plumbing and, electricity sort of technical issues, everything else in the house was kind of used the same. Just as a point of history, Mayurbhanj accessed from the Bay of Bengal right up left, and it sort of borders 3 different states. And the princesses who married into the family came from different kingdoms and countries. So my grandmother was the princess of Nepal, of the daughter of King Tribhuvan, and apart my mother's from the royal family of Jaisalmer in Rajasthan. And so you had these unique elements of different families that came in, because whenever a woman got married into the family, she came with her entourage and women who sort of took over, dominated the staff and the kitchen. On the left, it's one of the architectural pieces of the Bhanja dynasty from the 14th century. This is a brick-built terracotta temple, and the history of my story has come from the architectural pieces from the 8th century, 14th century, and they kind of became our blueprint for the foundation and architecture of the house to not be changed. Our experiences were meant to be hyper-local and authentic. 2 years ago was when we opened up the house to become a homestay. This was extremely nerve-wracking for my family. And it was something that was a conscious decision, because we realized that if the house wasn't seen as a community center in every essence of it, it would suddenly stop being as connected to the people around it. And we wanted to make sure there was a hint of the old, but we brought in people in. Bringing in the public was a huge part of making them feel this was also theirs. The picture on the right is actually from, there's a unique phenomenon in the East, in the state I come from in Orissa, called the Rath Yatra. It's literally called, chariot walk. It is when people, they make idols out of their gods, and they sort of parade them on this massive chariot. I don't know if you can tell from the pictures, but they usually go up to 50 to 100 feet. The unique thing about Mayurbhanj is that only women are allowed to pull the chariot in this very spiritual event. On the right is one of my ancestors actually doing the same thing on an elephant. With the state army and a few other people behind him, whereas on the left, that's my sister. The event still takes place. Last year was the 444th year. We actually did the event as a family with the community. A picture, this is just an interesting picture because on the right, it's Dr. Annie Besant, who was an Irish theosophist who actually came to India and was invited by my ancestors to speak on Irish self-rule. Quite ironic, given this was definitely well before 1947. And on the left is my sister, who was curating an artist residency by a local artist conglomerate group. The idea was you use elements of what was happening in the past, for example, patronage, and you make it artist residencies. You use the fact that there were elements that the family had already used to work with the community, and we're sort of elaborating on that now. I wanted to speak about one event in particular. Mimi has been so gracious to invite me, and I think I've spoken about Bulgaria, but I wanted to speak on one particular event that I think in 2 years of us being present, we've sort of been able to make a lot of impact with this, and it was called the Karkhana Chronicles. Karkhana in Hindi actually means atelier. These are workshops where craftsmen come and produce goods. They're usually associated with, it can be anything from textiles and fabric to workstations and historical properties in India. There were 575 royal families in the 40s. Over a period of time, different royal families signed on to merger agreements to make sure that they came under the Indian Union or the new state of Pakistan. However, it was only in the 70s and then subsequently in the 80s where privy purses were sort of banned by the government. This was when there was certain allocation of money from the state as decided during the merger agreements that went towards maintenance of these properties. As soon as that happened over the 80s and 90s, you had these tragic distress sales where, from 575 families, these were massive properties. Some of them were the largest private residences across, Asia. And it was hard to maintain them, hard to maintain the team for them. And but one thing that was very interesting was the custodianship of different arts and cultural practices, which these families, having had this community trust, seem to still be a part of. And so an idea was born called the Karkhana Chronicles. It was an international nonprofit agency that has come to India to talk about circular fashion. And I pitched them an idea, which was working with historical properties and their craft clusters and their artisans from their local communities, and coming up with a textile installation, which we present across palaces. So in the first round, what we did was we actually managed, and the pandemic was horrible on the crafts cluster in India. And I'm not sure how many of you know, but it's one of the backbones of the unofficial market of India. And so what we actually did was we partnered with 3 different families from the north, west, and the east of India. And we tried this as an experiment where we took over forts and palaces, worked with local artisan clusters to create installations. And then we invited the public. The idea was that innovation doesn't always have to happen in cities. And innovation is not just relegated to a few. We wanted to turn the idea of how textile traditions and cultural traditions that have sustainability or are historically significant to India are viewed by the public the same way they view historical properties today, which is from a sense of nationalism and pride. Also, it managed to tell the stories of these patrons and these custodians in a more humane way. There's been a sense of Indian royalties being looked at through what I call the Courtyard and the Rolls-Royce era, which is, sort of this very grandeur, which gives them a lot of sense of privilege, which is hard to connect with them and hard to sort of see them as, in need of collaboration or just authentic people you'd want to be able to support in some way. And so, each of these installations carried the campaign's key message, which was not just talking about climate action and change in our textile history, but also talking about celebrating local practices and bringing more people, bringing the world to these iconic places and properties. Something I want to mention is the reach that something like this had. When we think about historical properties, there's such a way of doing something. I can't imagine my grandparents they must have had a very different vision for the way the historical property would sort of be seen to the world. And I knew that something I could add was to make our voice more contemporary. And so when we do campaigns like this, we actually reach 2.5 million impressions by just being able to share our story digitally. And being able to interview our artisans and interview members of who have made this house what it is today. And it is the community surrounding it and the artisans surrounding it, and having their voice being amplified through our platform. For example, when we worked with Jaisalmer for this campaign, we actually had 1,000 footfall even during COVID with precautions. And for them to see what was in a sense a shepherd's dress with local prints, fabrics, and weaving techniques in a royal palace was a sense of aspiration for someone who would never think that the way they dress could be represented in a house such as this. We're actually going ahead and we got approval for a second round of this, which makes it very exciting, because that means that every time we do this, we have more and more historical properties that join us. And the second round, we're actually going to be taking this campaign to Mumbai in Maharashtra on the 10th of April at an interesting venue. The venue is actually a private members club that is, has locations all around the world. And the reason why I chose to do it there, not in a gallery or public space, one is because of the COVID protocols we need to keep in place. But 2 was we need to be able to tell our stories in much more contemporary, relevant spaces where we're not just preaching to the choir, but going to places that are younger, have a more diverse age group, and they're much more in diverse fields and not just in architecture or history or interested in heritage or restoration. We need to be working with creatives and different storytellers. Our story is the same, but it needs to be changed in the way it's told for a newer generation and audience. What I loved about working on a campaign like Karkhana Chronicles, because now it's 7 royal families and 7 palaces, forts, and iconic properties taking part, is that now you're doing it in a city where you can then, you're essentially networking and pitching your platform, your property, and you're saying, come contribute to be part of these properties, making change on the ground, or come collaborate, whether that's designers working with royal families and historical properties to come out with a collection of, say, sustainable bags, or whether it is, each historical property for me has always been a brand on its own. It's always been houses that the most successful ones change a creative vision and leadership every couple of decades, but in essence, they stay true to who they are and what they stand for. Mayurbhanj has always been known as the land of art and culture. We are famous for our indigenous practices and folk dances of dance, of song, of the spoken word, and of course our textiles and our crafts. And a lot of this is endangered. A lot of this is our living heritage, and we need to be mindful of the fact that we are in a position where we still enjoy privilege, but we can actually take our platform and use our voice and be able to share it with others and create something quite beautiful that makes these houses and their brands and legacies last a lifetime. Something that the reason why I screenshot this image is because it's Vogue. But the image that Vogue chose to use as the cover story for when they covered the Karkhana Chronicles was a Santali sari. It's an indigenous sari. It's worn by a certain tribe in India called the Santals that are found across the central east and some parts of the north. And I showed it to someone who is my colleague. She's part of the hospitality team because we only hire locally. Some of them haven't gone to hospitality school. And she said, that's what my grandmother wears, but I've forgotten the drape. I never knew it would be ever seen in a palace. And she kind of went back to her grandmother and kind of, tried to see if she could, wear something. And there was obviously something for her. It was just, there was a sense of wearing jeans and a shirt that was more popular these days. But I like the fact that through using, by experimenting with the different visual imagery and a vocabulary and tone, you actually connected with audiences you never thought had a stake in the running of your historical property. And for the same reason, it was very important for us to start telling our story with more diversity, with more inclusion, with really trying not to be tone deaf with the movements which are so social, political, and cultural happening around you today. I started taking stories of my ancestors and pitching them to brands who'd like to come and recreate old styles, making sure we're working with sustainable brands when they want to shoot a campaign somewhere. We were really excited because we were covered by Condé Nast Traveler the first year we opened up, of just being an offbeat place telling a different story. And we, this image at the bottom, the graphic is of annual artist residencies, yoga retreats, that we try to make sure we keep getting people who are themselves interesting, innovative, telling a different story. But really, you're centered between policy and pop culture, and you could really make some on-ground change. We have something called I'm going to end on one note. It is the Mayurbhanj Foundation. And a percentage of the funds raised from people staying with us actually go back into community activities, whether that's working in reviving an old form of martial arts dance called Mayurbhanj Chow, whether it's making sure that artisans are, getting equal and fair pay and fair wages through our program of working with Dokra artisans, again, an endangered art form in India, with local tribal communities. And third, making sure we have enough, we do volunteer activities, and we have saved up, a sum which can actually help local communities wherever we can raise up development indicators with impact. So this was just a little bit of the presentation. I think all that I can add is a personal anecdote of someone who is trying, as part of a different generation, but trying to make sure that I make my ancestors proud, and I keep the property in the heart of the community as it was intended to be about 200-300 years ago, and do it in a way that is true to who we are. Bring up the fact that we do keep social equity, we keep women at the center of the conversation. We want to keep local indigenous communities at the center of this conversation, and we really build a strong cultural brand that gives back to people and through that is able to sustain itself. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Actually, every time I hear you, I'm really, truly inspired. It's fantastic. And I love the idea of being innovative by actually reinventing what was there before. As you say, patronage can now result in an artist in residence program, etc., etc. Fantastic. Because in the interest of time, I'd like to move to the next speaker. I'd like to ask Baroness Christiane and daughter Justine from the Palazzo Parisio to present next, please. And I'm very, very happy to have you. So we are moving again from India to Europe, now to Malta. And I'm very, very excited to have you.
Hello, Mimi. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hi there.
Hi there. We're absolutely honored to be on this panel with everyone. And We're slightly nervous, to be honest, because
We
we're a bit
frankly-
overwhelmed.
Yeah, totally overwhelmed, and we don't quite know where to start, because truly we cannot compete. You know, everyone has been so wonderful and talked with so much passion, and what can we say? We are very, very small fry in the
In the island in the Mediterranean. So we're feeling a little bit.
I have
way down
invited you
south.
because I found you are one of the most inspiring people I've ever met, and you know your responses to the pandemic was just amazing, and I think it needs to be shared with the world. So don't, you know, this is like a small family, as you say. We all have in common that we really love our historic buildings. We want to ensure their survival and that they're flourishing. And so please, yes, we are so happy to have you. Tell us about your story, and it is a wonderful story which also never ceases to inspire me. You know how you started by inheriting the property and making, you know, cakes on the weekend and building up this fantastic, vibrant, you know, cultural community and, you know, business.
Okay.
Well, actually,
I'm going to share the screen at least so
Yes.
that you can see some. Well, I'm going to. A bit tricky on how to do this, to be honest. You have to bear with me unless you have it yourself, but.
Ayushi, would you be able to share this, or who has this presentation?
I'm not quite sure how it's done. It's not giving me permission. For some reason.
Are you not a co-host? No, let me see.
If you need, I can share the PowerPoint
Yes.
for you.
Yes,
Could you please? Thank you.
great. Thank you.
Give me 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Anyway, we can start talking.
I think
So,
it's a really fantastic panel, you know, with all of these very different perspectives and different approaches and similarities at the same time. So there we go. Yeah.
there we go. Here it
Can you
is.
see it?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to briefly give you a little bit of the history of Palazzo Parisio and how we got into this venture. The house belonged to my great-grandfather, who in Malta was the first merchant banker way back in 1875. In fact, he created Scicluna's Bank. And this was one of his homes, actually, a country, considered his country lodge, because really and truly, his main residence was in town, as we say, downtown, and it was called Dragonara Palace, which is still here today. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it has become the Casino of Malta, and still lives today. It's a huge property, absolutely beautiful, but more or less government run today. As for Palazzo Parisio, it remained in the family. My great-grandfather was brought up in this house, and actually he built the house together with his friend Charlie Strickland at the time. And he decided that this would be his residence, let's say, up in the country. And so he had this property, which he bought from an Italian gentleman called Mr. Parisio. And in fact, there are two Palazzo Parisios in Malta. One which is possibly more famous than ours, because today it is the Foreign Office in Valletta. It's a beautiful building which was built by the same architect, an Italian architect named Carlo Sada. And sometimes that Palazzo Parisio is more famous than ours, because it is said that Napoleon on his way to Egypt actually resided there for a couple of days in Valletta. And basically, so Palazzo Parisio in Valletta is much more famous than this one here in Nasha. However, It was my great-grandfather's residence. And then basically, when he died, it was left very much closed. And he left a son, a little boy of 8 years old, who was then became the Marquis Scicluna, and therefore the banker who took over from my great-grandfather. And he inherited this house, but did never live here really and truly, because he lived in Dragonara in town. So basically what happened was that it was closed, and every now and again he would rent, not even rent it, but people would tell him, you know, "Oh, Marcus, could my daughter get married there? Could we do this? Could we do that?" And he would always obviously say yes. And basically that's how we came into doing events and weddings and opening it up to the public. But on a very small scale, until about 20 years ago, I decided to come back to Malta, because I have never lived in Malta except from when I was a child, because I lived practically all my life in France, Paris. Then when I got married to an Italian, I lived in Italy for many years. And one fine day, I decided I should go back to Malta and see what I was going to do with this property here in Malta, which was virtually closed. So I had always been used to working, and I thought, well, let me do something in Malta. I just cannot sit here and socialize. So I'm going to open up the palace. This is how it started. And how could I do that was that I used to be quite a good cook, and I used to love baking cakes. And I thought, okay, I'm going to open to tourists, the few that came. And then as they would come all the way up to this little village, Nashar, I would be able to offer them a piece of cake and a cup of tea and some refreshments, you know. So all by my little self, I got together a few tables and chairs. This sounds terribly awful, but still, it's the truth. I rigged up a kitchen in the palace, which was absolute doom and gloom. And, you know, I was literally in the back of beyond, and I started doing this. I had a friend, my girlfriend, who used to take people on tour around the Palazzo. And basically, little by little, it grew and grew. And here I am today, 20 years later, with what can I say?
A fairly large operation.
A fairly large operation, which, you know, and a garden that had to be totally restored, refurbished, the house itself, which is ongoing, an ongoing restoration, if I can say. And here we are today, you know, with 10 people in the kitchen, 40 people working for us, and us 2 girls.
100 weddings a year, and
a fully fledged restaurant, museum. I don't say the museum, I mean, we do 30,000, we used to do last year, 30,000
visitors a year. Yeah.
Visitors a year. And well, I've spent these last years inventing what I can do to bring the public in, and it is a Maltese heritage home. And my daughter and I, well, we just plod along, try our very best, and of course, you know, do what everyone else does, probably on a lesser scale, but still.
Yes, definitely on a smaller scale.
And then, of course, we are closed. We were hit like everyone else by the pandemic. So
we've done our best to, like everybody else, reinvent ourselves in the best way we can. So providing takeaway, bottling of 600 liters of olive oil and selling it,
Making marmalade
as well,
baking cakes, selling them, baking bread, and you know, sort of the Baroness's homemade bread and packing it up and gift wrapping it and sending it to clients. You name it, we do it. I mean, we stick in there and try our best and hope to reopen very soon, because we're full of passion and enthusiasm. And now Justine is the new generation.
Yes.
And she has to take over, and she's got lots of ideas. I mean, and here we go, we're ready to.
I mean, our next, we're currently obviously working under lockdown, so we are trying to reach out to our community in a different way. So we've gone onto the street and opened a little side door where we can still be sort of present for the local community, but especially our village, because usually the village people feel quite
bewildered,
afraid of even coming anywhere near the building. And so the fact that actually we've opened up onto the street has really made a huge difference and has sort of connected us with our closer community. So we're very happy about that. What else have we been doing? Doing quite a lot, really. Naturally, all our events and all our projects have been put on hold, and weddings postponed like everybody else. But we're quite hopeful that things will sort of eventually, you know, we'll be back in business, hopefully very soon. In the meantime, we're working on a project of a boutique hotel. We'll be hopefully sort of adding to the experience of the palace, a
luxury guest
house of 16 rooms where people can stay. So that's ongoing at the moment. Yes, cultural hub, absolutely. Sorry, I'm following this. We're not very good at presentations, I'm afraid. We're starting to organize, we've already started, but we're planning to become more of a cultural hub and inviting musicians and theatre companies to sort of make the place live a little bit, because for the last few years we've been concentrating mainly on our
banqueting and
events and restaurant operation, and we think that
with the pandemic
it opens up also an opportunity to make the place a little bit more exciting locally.
And people are, you know, just need to go places and do something, because at least here on our little island it's limited and we're all terribly social, and so opening up the garden has really given people the opportunity to sort of enjoy the Palazzo and its gardens, and it's really like a cultural club in a certain way.
It is. It's a community.
It's a community.
What else can we say?
Nothing.
Really and truly, it's. I mean, we don't see it so much as a, how do you call it, as a sort of historic building. It's our home, so we've opened it up. It's almost like we've extended our home beyond the garden, so it becomes one big home, really. So although it is a business, obviously, and it's a very challenging business, and also we don't get any help from
any grants, any help
from the government. So any restoration or anything that we do is
All from our
obviously-
own pocket, no subsidies whatsoever.
So it's tough.
It's
It's
challenging,
tough, it's
tough.
challenging. We own the property with another side, the other side of the family who are involved in other businesses. So it's just me and my mother, and we press on.
Yes,
Try and do our
practically,
best, really. Don't know, do you have anything else to add? I'm not quite sure.
Hello, are you there?
Is anybody there?
Is anyone there?
Thank you, thank you. This is really wonderful, and I particularly love the idea that you combine the concerts. You gave opportunities to artists who had no employment during the pandemic. You were live streaming it on Facebook. You combine it with the delivery service. I mean, all of this was really fantastic and really inspirational. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I really hope that there'll be time then to discuss with the other participants. And I'd like to now move over to India again and invite Anuradha from Jaipur and Neela House, which is an initiative of the Lady Bamford Foundation, to talk about this project.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm also feeling a little bit overwhelmed, I think. So yeah, absolutely. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, could you go to slideshow, please?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, is that better?
Yes.
Is that okay? Okay, great. Am I already on slideshow? I can't seem to see it.
No, you're not yet.
Yeah, not yet. I don't know.
Press
Yeah,
the button.
now?
There,
Perfect.
Present to
All right,
you.
great. Okay, so yeah, Neela House. Neela House is in Jaipur, and it is actually a CSR project. So this has been really interesting. It's been really interesting because for all of you who've already spoken before me, it's more about your own history and your own families that you're talking about, and the heritage homes that you've sort of brought forward towards the world. For us, it's more historical in terms of the Indian culture, which is a really important part of who we are. And I particularly have been working with historic cultures and within Rajasthan for about 20 years now. And this project, Neela House, is actually a corporate social responsibility project. It is part of the JCB brand, the brand that makes earth-moving excavators. And the family has been invested in India for about 40 years. And it's interesting because corporate social responsibility has actually now started, sort of coming up with various projects in India. But the JCB brand has worked with corporate social responsibility now for 20 years. We have three major projects, verticals. One is the Lady Bamford Charitable Trust, one is the Lady Bamford Foundation, and one is the Literature Foundation. Lady Bamford, because she's the founder and patron of all the projects, and her history, as some of you may know, is in the organic and is in the sustainable field. She's worked with organic farms, and she has a brand for women's products, which are also organic and sustainable in UK, based out of Staffordshire and Gloucestershire. And she's actually worked on responsible farming based with traditional methods, and across board. And she's worked in India with the artisans. So she always had this idea that she wanted to bring forward the artisans and actually celebrate their skill, their love for the crafts and for heritage, and actually showcase that in the most excellent way. Neela House stems from, this doesn't seem to be moving forward.
Maybe, you know, in this case, maybe don't do the presentation.
There you go. I think that's better.
Good.
Yeah, so Neela House, it's the initiative of the Lady Bamford Charitable Foundation, and it was set up in 2017. But but we've worked with artisans and crafts over the years. But the building itself, which I'm going to talk about, actually was launched in 2019. The word Neela comes from blue, which also means temple, which means nest, which means moon. And it sort of captures the spirit of Neela House because it's a sort of a place to gather, and it's a place for beauty and to showcase the skills of handicrafts, you know, in India. The actual idea of Neela began many, many years ago. And, you know, being a sustainable crop, indigo was once grown widely across India, its cultivation enriching in the soil, and it was grown and generating local employment in farming and traditional skills. However, introduction to synthetic dyes in the 19th century, coupled with a revolt against India, forced the cultivation of the crop to decline. The impact of the synthetic dyes in many areas, the chemical discharge from the synthetic dyes, the pollutants surrounding the soil, etc., are the conversations that actually were brought about when we started working at Neela House. You know, how can we work with organic? How can we work with natural? How can we work with cultural? How can we work with heritage? And go back and not only teach ourselves, reteach ourselves, but also, you know, work with the artisans who know, work with the artisans who want to go back to their heritage and culture, and actually, you know, rework the rework the cycle. So the center actually is a center of excellence in Jaipur, which through its various facilities and programs, we sort of provide an intellectual space for the artisan communities, as well as designers and interactive spaces. I'm just going to go back now into how Neela House was actually found. So, you know, again, the organization went around, I think, Jaipur for a couple of years trying to find the right space. Lady Bamford was quite clear that she didn't want to build from the ground, but she wanted to actually restore, because the whole ethos was to go back to history and culture. So if you see the orange portion here, this was the old walled city of Jaipur. And this was the new city of Jaipur, which was started building in the 1930s. And Neela House was built in the late 1940s. There were two homes that were built together and by a family. Unfortunately, due to some you know, unforeseen circumstances, only one home was lived in. And even till date, only one home was lived in. And Neela House actually was, for the past 20 or 25 years, has had nobody in the building. So this is Neela House as it was when we took over in 2017. I've lived in Jaipur for 20 years, and I've sort of gone up and down this road looking at this beautiful building, which was dilapidating. You know, we could see monkeys and we could see dogs and we could see, you know, all sorts of animals, but, you know, no sort of inhabitation at all, nobody working on it. It used to hurt because, you know, especially working in heritage and culture, you used to feel that, oh, this is going to be another building that's going to be pulled down and there's going to be a multi-storied sort of hotel or something that's going to come up. And then this house was sort of identified by the Lady Bamford Foundation, and we felt that this was the best place for Neela House to be housed. A building which has its historical culture, a building which retains it, because actually nobody's lived there. So there hasn't really been too much tampering. It just needs refurbishment and renovation. And a building which, if you see the central courtyard, has rooms around it. And this is a very, very traditional sort of Indian home, where there was always a central courtyard and there were rooms around it. And the central courtyard was used as a space for people to come and meet during the day, you know, to cook, even in India, you make your own masalas, you know, you grind your own masalas so you wash your masalas and you put them out in the sun. So, you know, this was the space that would be used. I'm going to go back to the layout of the building. There is a basement in the building, which is actually quite astonishing, that in the 1940s, there was a building made with a basement, with a ladder room. The ground floor has rooms around it, as well as a porch in the front, as well as a large kitchen towards the back over here. And then of course there's a terrace on top, which had, so it was just a single-story building, and we've made a few bamboo sort of pavilions in there. So this was the renovation of the building. It took from 2017 to about 2019, a slow process. I think for a few months in the middle, there was somebody who had come and rented the accommodation, the building, and they actually renovated with cement and a bit of brick. But that is actually not the traditional way of restoration. So we actually, what we wanted also to do is to create this building as a showcase of built heritage restoration techniques. So we actually stripped the building back to the bone, took away all the plaster and the cement that was used for some kind of renovation, I think in the late 1970s. And what we got below it was stone and what you call and a lime. So the way the restoration is done is with lime and with local sand, which is a red sand, and you mix it together. And in that you put a jaggery, and you put tamarind and a couple of other things, and you make a paste out of it. Now this paste needs to actually ferment for a couple of months before it actually is put onto the building. And they say that cement has a life of 100 years. But this technique of sand and lime has a life after 100 years. So this is the technique that was also used in all our forts in Rajasthan, and I'm sure many other places across the country as well. But our forts in Rajasthan, which are hundreds of years and thousands of years old, are still sort of standing. And it's quite amazing. So this is what we use. This is the technique that we used to restore Neela House. Here you can see in August 2017 we took the building and what it sort of looked like, clearing it out. And 2019 is what we had, the basic structures, which was refurbished. And then of course in October 2019. We had the finished structure, and we launched Neela House as the center of excellence for the preservation and promotion of crafts and arts. It has now also more become like a hub for a cultural space. I think the people of Jaipur sort of see it as an iconic building and an iconic space for interaction, a creative interaction, whether it's arts, whether it's crafts, whether it's even music or dance. We have the courtyard that you all saw in the beginning, as well as this front space that you see is a great space for poetry, reading, for book launches, etc., which we try and do at least once a month. This is the building as it is today, the central courtyard. We have a shop space, which showcases products that we design with artisans and with communities in Rajasthan, as well as in a few other parts of the country, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha. We have a textile gallery in the basement, and it showcases, at the moment, it's housing a private collection by Mr. Brij Bhasin, who is a collector of crafts, and he has graciously lent us his collection for a year. And it's really interesting because visitors can actually see the traditional crafts and the skill that the traditional craftsmen had, and how it sort of translates into a modern product, which we showcase in our shop. We also have workshop rooms around the courtyard. So if I go back here, the courtyard has workshop rooms around it, as well as a library. So these are the workshop rooms. There's a block print room, there's a dyeing room, and this is our dye bath here with indigo leaves in it. And we have a library. And we have a spinning room as well. So the idea of these workshop rooms was not only, for us to use within Nila, which we do, of course, every single day, but also for artisans to come and, a space for interaction with designers, with artists, with scholars, with students. The library hosts books, on textiles and crafts and design. And it's an amazing space because when we have artists here and when we have artisans here from the community, I see many of them sort of sitting and looking through the books. The language might not be theirs, but it's so interesting seeing them sitting and looking at these books, which on a usual basis, they might not have access to. So the aims and objectives of Nila House, is to basically support artisan communities and celebrate and preserve the rich Indian heritage crafts traditions. It wants to create a dynamic platform for artisan exchange and innovation. And it's a place for exploration for contemporary interpretations of the traditional craft skills as well. It's a space where we want to actually talk about, the conversations. So in the past, for instance, the past few years, I think, there's a growing conversation around preservation of handwoven textiles and the promotion of sustainable design. So it's a space where, we want to provide a space for people to come together and work on these conversations, to look at policy, to look at how we can make life better. The pandemic has not been great for the artisan community. We're trying to support them as much as we can. The 4 projects that we actually work under are research and development, which also includes archiving and documentation. We do creative innovation with, as I said before, with designers and with artisans and with artists. We have activities and programming, which actually spreads across board from children to to just interested individuals, to actually very serious technical workshops. So we have a space for that, as well as for experimentation, and of course market facilitation for the artisan, because that is key. Today, when we have conversations with artisans, the first question is, yes, of course, we'd love to do indigo, but where's the market? So I think, Nila, we're very small. We're starting very small. I know the conversation of indigo and the conversation of natural dye and the conversation of hand spun and hand woven is being really spoken about, and slow fashion and sustainable fashion. And it's something that, many individuals and many organizations have been working on for years. And I just feel that, another small organization working on the same thing will sort of, again, make the movement grow. We are doing indigo farming. So in the back end of this building, which is our center of excellence, there's some projects with the community, with the artisans that we have been working on for the past year and a half. The first is indigo farming. Indigo farming is still done in West Bengal, and that's basically where most of the indigo is coming from. However, we feel in Rajasthan, it used to grow years ago in the wild. It still grows in the wild, but it's not really being used for dyeing purposes anymore or extraction. So we really want to start that conversation again. In Gujarat, yes, there is still indigo being used in the communities, in the artisan communities. But the conversation also is about natural indigo, because today German indigo, which is sort of which has an influx in the market, is actually a chemical and it's polluting the land. So the conversation with the artisans always is that, yes, of course, it's great to grow the indigo. It's great to and move that value chain. So if you grow it, you're able to extract the indigo and actually use it in your vat. There you have the whole value chain, which is sustainable because it's in your own workshop space. So that's one of the projects that we're looking at. We are actually already working with 5 small artisan units in 5 different states. So we're actually looking at how indigo is grown in 5 different states of the country, and documenting it so that it can grow further. Artisan support, again, is very major. We work with artisans who have indigo vats, might be using German indigo, but are willing to look at natural indigo. So the support they need to sort of have linkages with our value chain, as well as, of course, design intervention, and then, of course, market facilitation. During the lockdown, one thing that we did again was to work with hand spin and hand spinners in Rajasthan and Gujarat. And this is something that I think for years, for many, many, hundreds of years, people have been spinning, but again, diminishing. There are women in the communities that we've identified who know how to spin, anywhere, and the oldest are nearly 80 years old. So, it was important for us to, again, go back to creating a value chain, not just buying hand-spun fabric, or not just buying, hand-spun yarn to weave it, but actually, where is that value chain going to start from? Of course, it starts all the way back into farming, which is, again, a conversation that we're already having, how to grow local indigenous cotton, and then take it to the spinner, who will spin it, and then the weaver, and then the natural dye. So that's the entire trajectory of and the value chain that we're trying to create. During the lockdown, we actually did a lot of trainings with women in the community, on a one-to-one basis. And we've actually managed to identify 30 women in Gujarat and about 60 women in Rajasthan, an hour from Jaipur, who can spin, and we're working on them in terms of their quality, etc. So women and sort of interaction with women and women empowerment is really also key to our organization, as well as the Lady Bamford Charitable Trust, who works with communities all over the country. So this is Neela House. Again, for you, there's the archives gallery, there's the shop, there's artisan interaction, their collaborations, and their programming activities. I don't know if I'll be able to play this. It's just a very short video. Just to end by saying that, during the lockdown, again, this is something that we've also managed to do, which is amazing, which we are all, a part of today, is actually go global. So, I think we're also comfortable in our own spaces. And even at Neela, we used to have workshops for people who would come to Neela, or would be in Jaipur, or would be traveling and would ask us for workshops or for programs or come and see the space. But during the pandemic, we've actually gone online, not only with our products, but our workshops, as well as talks and interactive sessions with artisans and the community to to spread the word of handmade in India, and to work on through our various projects. So I think it's really interesting in a way what the pandemic has done for us, because we've actually gone external and we're trying to find new collaborations worldwide, and this is one of them. It's amazing to be on this panel, and thank you, Mimi, for having us here to represent ourselves.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation. I've got now, first of all, we have a number of questions, but I would like to ask you, the participants, because the Center for Historic Houses has three stakeholders. Number one, primarily the owners of historic houses, or those custodians of historic houses, and then heritage experts and then the public. So I just like to know from you, and especially William, you've got so much experience with the European houses. So how has this been for you to now learn about the houses in India? What are the kind of similarities? What is different? And to what extent did you all feel you have been participating? That this is something useful, that this is something really interesting that might be, spark something, an initiative or something, or confirmation of something that you were doing.
Mimi, if I can start, maybe just say that I think it's so inspiring to hear these stories, from examples of houses that have never been open to the public before, or have been never lived in before, or have just been sort of disconnected from their communities. And I think it's seriously inspiring to me, as someone who lives in the sort of glorious world of having villages on my doorstep who all love coming to historic houses to have a cup of tea because it's a national sport in this country, visiting historic houses. It's really inspiring and amazing to see that. That's the overriding thing for me, that, this connection with heritage that people want to feel, but they don't necessarily know how. We have to help them to engage with the heritage through interpretation, through openness, through welcoming, and that family sense of, allowing people in. That's, for me, the overriding thing that comes out.
Thank you. And now, Akshita, maybe the other way around, someone from a historic house in India, seeing what people are doing in Europe and their challenges and so on. So how is this to you? You're very familiar with the Indian context. How is it if you are, learning about the European houses?
Yeah, I'd actually been for an event in Paris. It was a debutante. It's called Les Balles des Débutantes, and that was the first time I was in a room with other families, and it was really interesting because our conversations went back to the same thing. We were talking about hobbies, and they said tourism and a bit of policy, and our families are a little bit interested in farming and gardening. And I was like, do you all have a historical property? Because we kind of seem to do the same thing no matter what we study, because our family legacies become, whether you studied art, an art degree or an engineering degree, you build it back to come back and become a leader in the community you're from. It becomes intrinsic because it's so much the story of our family. But I think what's inspiring from Europe is there, and Mimi, I'm going to give you a lot of credit for this. There hasn't been a lot of knowledge sharing. So I'm 20. I just turned 28. My birthday was actually 2 days ago. I don't have the information or mentors because all I can rely on is past anecdotes. And it wasn't very easy for the generation before me to sort of make that switch because they were so much more caught in it. It was much more recent for India. It was only the 70s when they really stopped getting any kinds of subsidy, which in any way was quite paltry to the sum of our national GDP, but also what was needed for families like this to sort of sustain themselves. So what's inspiring is when, I saw the concerts, or I see like making jam and pickle, and it sounds crazy, but I don't think my grandmother envisioned it. And now I'm sitting and talking to someone across the sea saying, yeah, we're trying to make our own jam too. How do we brand and label this? Because, to explain to my grandmother, I'm going to be going to the local bazaar with like, Bulgaria Palace jams. Like it was just like, I remember she used to be on the balcony with these silver binoculars, and she kept seeing the first time we opened it up to a local crowd for an arts exhibition. And we had to keep telling her our friends were over, because we didn't know how to break it to her that there would just suddenly be, there was no boundary between the public and the private. And, I think someone said that beautifully, that I can keep saying it's a historical property, but it is my home. You are having and so many times people come in here and they say, well, where is our butler? And, why aren't we driving the vintage cars around? And do you also have the aircrafts? And you're still trying to bridge that gap from breaking the stereotype and becoming a caricature in someone's eyes, because that's how you're sort of portrayed in mainstream media, to suddenly becoming someone and, learning from each other on the best ways to stay relevant, to be impactful, and to make sure that you're continuously building on a legacy that was handed out to you. So, it's a lot of gratitude there, but how do you make it something that's going to last another 100 years? That's all on you. And so thinking outside the box is needed. And there's, a lot of questions came up about the financial aspect. And of course, there is no academic body or research or, even from a sociological perspective to understand how do you start the conversation on the futures of these historical properties? Because they mean so much to the places they belong to. So what's beautiful really is the knowledge sharing and knowing that you're being part of a network that somehow understands you, and you don't need to sort of live a dual life. You can combine these personalities together and be something that's mirroring what society is today.
Right. So we really hope that, William, I have high hopes that you will be participating in our activities with all of your experience and so on, because we really need this, because we are just building up this network and so on. And we really want to, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, because we need to learn from those who have already, experienced it, with all their problems and challenges, and also the great parts. And thank you. Christiane and Justine, I wanted to ask you, I know I kind of lured you into this and I know you really don't like presentations and so on, but I really hope that, this kind of homely kind of community of those people who have historic houses, who love historic houses, and, want to do something with them. I remember what you said, Christiane, I'm grateful to my grandfather so that I inherited the building, but now we need to get on with it. And I think this is kind of it. Right? Yeah. So I would like to know from you now, you've participated, we have so many different types of properties, even if it's a huge property like Vaux-Le Vicomte, you have, very similar problems, ultimately, what do you do with a fountain from the 17th century, and, very basic things and similar problems. Yeah. So what do you think, from listening to the Indian stories and so on, do you feel that something is inspiring, something is, shared, and something that you might try out, or how do you feel about this thing?
I found everything incredibly inspiring, and I'm so embarrassed because we were totally unprepared, and everyone's story is so different, but then again there are similarities, in every story. So I found it incredibly inspiring, and I'm really thank you for the opportunity to listen to everybody. It was fantastic.
It was
very, very interesting.
And the young lady who spoke last, really and truly, it's so true what she said. She really, got it right, and what we feel too, wonderful. Our compliments, we are full of admiration.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. We're a bit speechless, really.
Yes, but one thing, we're going to do a marmalade festival.
Yes, we're going to try that one. We're going to try that one.
We're going to try that one.
Yeah, I see the potential. So I really hope that you'll continue the conversation afterwards. I'll share all of the emails and so on, the profiles. I'll share the little videos and so on, so that you can watch it, and also share some videos of the properties. You have some beautiful short videos from Palazzo Parisio, which I really like. I've often used them for my students to show them, this is how you do it in heritage management. And also Akshitas and so on. I've used Nila House, I've used the presentations and so on. So, and with Nila House, I would really love to do some online workshops, maybe through the center as a forum. Even for our audience in Europe. And I've just, ordered this wonderful ceramics, service from Nila House, and I'm so happy with it. It's really wonderful. Do you actually sell these products in England as well? Because, we've been even thinking about maybe we can have an exchange between the palaces. Maybe, those who have a vineyard or olive oil, they can send some olive oil and wine to us. And we might have tea. William, I know he is also a tea connoisseur. He has a tea, he is blending teas, right? And so on. So there are so many
how interesting. Yes.
opportunities for collaboration. And yes, you have tea in your shop and in your cafe. So I think why not support each other as properties rather than buying from a dealer? I think, this is...
Why not? Yes.
Actually, yes, we did a lot for tea. We, at least in Malta, introducing fine teas, which was quite something, actually. Started 10 years ago, and now everyone appreciates it. And, tea has become such a cultural event, really and truly. And the history behind tea is just wonderful. I can send you olive oil.
We can send you olive oil, because we make it ourselves.
I need olive oil, very much so. I wish I could have cheese, because here I'm not able to buy any cheese where I live. This is something that I really miss. Right.
We did 100 liters this year. 1,000 liters
Amazing.
of olive oil from our grove.
Transportation will be some challenge and so on,
Yes,
but maybe not a glass bottle, but a metal.
Mimi,
And labeling too.
Yes.
Mimi, something which is quite interesting coming out of this, I think, is that all of the houses that have spoken and the families and have all basically done something without necessarily knowing it's going to work.
Right.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
it's that self-belief
Yeah.
that old houses have, I think, which perhaps, because we're all kind of, what's the yield in 3 years, all of that stuff. Old house families don't care about the yield in 3 years. We care about it in 30 years and 300 years. And so because of that, I think we're possibly more willing to try something crazy.
Yes,
and I think that's something that I'm seeing is, we're all prepared to just, let's do pizza deliveries in a pandemic. Why not? Let's do
we
a
tried
marmalade
that. We
thing.
tried that, and it worked.
Yeah, right.
It worked.
I know, precisely. So, let's do marmalade festivals. Let's do crazy things like a Paddington Bear picnic, which I've been to before, that sort of thing, because people love it.
Yeah, they do.
It's true.
I think we need an exchange, kind of a list of all of the ideas that people did, some kind of really presentations. I think that's the next thing I want to do, like great innovative responses during the pandemic and so on, which are not necessarily visitor related. I know, William, we've talked about this. I think this is something that would be really helpful. Because some of the ideas have been really great. And I think the challenge, particularly between the digital and revenue generation, that's something that you really achieve with the live streaming of the concerts. I think it's such a beautiful win-win situation where you help the artists, the larger public benefits because they see the palace, they are able to listen to the concert, and you combine it with a delivery service, for example. This is really smart and this is great. So this is something that should be shared, with the other community of owners. So at this time, I'd like to end the discussion. You've been, this has been a real luxury for us to indulge in 2 hours of listening about historic houses. And thanks everyone, especially also the interns from Oxford University for having done such a tremendous job and being so helpful. I mean, I could put almost my feet up on the table, which I don't normally do. It's really lovely. And we must continue this. And I think especially this dialogue, it shouldn't be a national dialogue because these are things that are of concern to all of us. We need to know this, and we need to build this up in India to make it into a viable business. We need to have this network of supporters so that we can exchange ideas. I think that's really important. So, and I'm glad, so I hope you'll have the opportunity to listen to some of the other lectures, and I'll share some of the videos. We've had amazing also lectures from the Louvre with a little known collection of Asian art, and he showed us objects that are not normally on display. I mean, wonderful things like this. And something that I really appreciated from the director of the Smithsonian for digital learning, he said one of his most important tasks is actually to make a difference to people's lives, to really improve people's lives through this learning through heritage. And this is something I want to emphasize, this kind of positive aspect, that what we do actually really positively impacts, rather than only lamenting or looking at negative things and so on, but, moving forward and building the community and impacting the community and creating this, I always call it a win-win situation for everyone, right? It will help you and the historic house to flourish, but also the larger community. And I think this is great. It's the best job in the world, really, to do something like this. So thank you very much. And wonderful. This was the first attempt of this kind of international panel, anything dealing with historic houses, from curation, education, conservation, to management. It's really, really wonderful. And I'm really thrilled. I've learned a lot in these past few days.
Mimi, thank you. You've really done a wonderful job, and we're so proud to have had the opportunity to participate, and we hope to be able to do so many more times.
Thank
and
you.
Better too.
And I can't wait to visit Palazzo Parisio. After all of these years, I've never been able to visit, and last time I was in Italy, so I must really, really come next time.
I wish you would. We do an excellent cup of tea. Okay. Bye.
Thank you all so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Così chiude.